Good evening and welcome to tonight's program hosted by Idea to IPO and the Commonwealth Club, Silicon Valley. My name is Rob Lau. We're proud to present tonight's program as a collaborative effort between Idea to IPO and the Commonwealth Club, Silicon Valley. To find out more about our events, visit our websites, ideatoipo.com and commonwealthclub.org. On Tuesday, August 8th, there will be a panel discussion on the latest innovations in artificial intelligence at the College of San Mateo. On Thursday, August 10th, Richard Dawkins, evolutionary biologist, makes the case for science education at this critical juncture. And this program will be at the Santa Clara Convention Center. During our program, we'll have time for your questions. Please write them legibly on provided question cards, and members of our volunteer staff will be collecting them throughout the program. The Commonwealth Club is proud to podcast and broadcast a number of our programs on KQED Public Radio, 88.5 FM, on Fridays at 8 p.m., KLIV, 1590 AM, on Thursdays at 7 p.m. For this reason, we ask that you silence your cell phones. Thank you. I'll pause for a brief moment as we begin recording tonight's program. Good evening and welcome to tonight's program hosted by Idea to IPO and the Commonwealth Club Silicon Valley. My name is Rob Lau. It is my pleasure to introduce Vinod Khosla, entrepreneur, investor, technologist, and founder of Khosla Ventures. Vinod received his bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology, a master's degree in biomedical engineering from Carnegie Mellon University, and a master's degree in business administration from the Stanford University Graduate School of Business. After graduating, Vinod co-founded his first successful company to IPO, Daisy Systems. In 1982, he founded Sun Microsystems, and 4 years later joined Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield & Byers as a general partner. In 2004, Vinod formed Khosla Ventures to focus on assisting entrepreneurs build impactful new energy and technology companies, and his greatest passion is being a mentor to entrepreneurs building technology-based businesses. Vinod is a charter member of the Indus Entrepreneurs, a founding board member of the Indian School of Business. And moderating this evening's conversation is Nellie Bowles, reporter for the New York Times. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Vinod Khosla and Nellie Bowles.
So how many people here are entrepreneurs or want to be entrepreneurs? Good. The rest of you should be.
So let's just jump right in. Mm-hmm. I've got a lot of questions, and you are a man with a lot of opinions. So I want to talk tonight about the future, about entrepreneurship, about clean tech, about AI. But first, I want to lay out the present and sort of where we are in the present state of innovation. So this current startup boom, we've had a Blue Apron IPO, the Snapchat IPO, both have been struggling. We've got Uber, which is a mess. What's the current state of Silicon Valley right now?
You know, I'm very optimistic about Silicon Valley. You look at the Snap IPO. I don't really care about that. I care about the founding of Snap. That's when it originates, or the founding of Uber. These things that start up is sort of the interesting phase, and the question I ask is, how many new things are starting up? The one way to look at Silicon Valley, and especially important in contrasting it to the rest of the world, they think the rest of the world knows or thinks they know what's important. You know, you ask anybody in Washington, in New York, or Wall Street, and say, what's important in energy, in climate? It's General Electric and Siemens. I'd give you 100-to-1 odds that no large innovation will come out of any institutional player.
But Silicon Valley knows what's important?
Well, no, it doesn't. But what Silicon Valley does really, really well is originate interesting experiments. You think Uber's a mess. I think of Uber as having changed our notion of transportation. It started with a limo service at the very high end, just like Airbnb started with rooms in Philadelphia in 2008 during the Democratic National Convention and sort of brokering rooms. That seed of an idea ends up being way more important than Hilton Hotels after 50 years or however many years Hilton Hotels been around. That's what's important. And it's, to me, what's really even more important about Silicon Valley is while the world thinks they know what's important, a Volkswagen is important or a General Motors is important to innovation in cars, reality is they're largely irrelevant to innovation. It's some improbable that's important. What people confuse outside of Silicon Valley is this notion that obviously the big players are important, when I would say almost certainly they're unimportant. What's hard to say is the opposite. Improbable, like Uber was, or Airbnb was, or Google was in 1998, is not unimportant. In fact, the only thing that's important is some improbable. Sorry, I'm getting a little technical here. It's just we don't know which improbable is important. And because Silicon Valley runs so many experiments, and people like you love to write about all the failures because they make better headlines. No, just except you. I give Nellie and reporters beef on chasing column inches. That's a story we can get to at some point. You probably don't want to cover it.
That's a question for later tonight. I've got that.
But it's these improbable sounding experiments that are really, really important about Silicon Valley. And what's become even more exciting and healthy is not IPOs. It's the number of new areas the Valley is attempting to innovate in. You know, a few years ago, we invested in this hamburger company, right? Impossible Foods. Now there's probably 40 or 50 PhDs and probably 40 or 50 other technologists working on designing the perfect hamburger. Why? The founders started it because 30 to 50% of our planet's land area, until Elon goes to Mars, this is the only planet we have, is dedicated to animal husbandry, and he said it was key to environmental change in doing these things better, in addition to other things like cruelty to animals and other things. And he wanted $2 million or $3 million, I forget, to run an experiment. Could he do this? It's now gotten into a robust product that's all over, and it could become a niche product. But the goal clearly for the founder is to replace all animal husbandry. Now, you're not going to get that from Cargill or ADM. They don't even know this is important. Right? And they won't innovate because they don't really care as much about the mission of a sustainable planet.
Do you think you could have innovation outside of this region?
Sure you can. One thing to realize is innovation can happen anywhere and everywhere. It's much more about a mindset and a culture than it is about a place. What makes it harder other places is when somebody innovates, they don't get that support around them.
Yeah.
You know, in Silicon Valley, I'm sorry to say, if you're 15 years at HP or Hewlett-Packard or Cisco, you're not qualified to do any important job in the startup world, right? Every other part, and I grew up in India, hey, wow, you work for GE or Cisco. Here, you work for GE and Cisco for 15 years? You're not hireable by anybody important. Right? I'll get flack from HP and Cisco, but
Certainly will.
I know that. But it is true. You're not qualified to innovate if you're at Cisco for 15 years, or IBM for 15 years, or Cargill for 15 years, or United Healthcare for 15 years. I don't want to pick just Cisco or HP. It's every large institution. Let me take just a minute.
Okay, then I want to get you onto clean tech.
To give you my worldview. I went through an exercise of trying to just see if I could find a large innovation coming out of big companies, major innovation. And there's plenty of minor innovations, incremental innovations that come out of big companies, but they truly are incremental. And I couldn't find one in the last 25 years. You look at retail. Did Amazon innovate this or Walmart? Amazon did. Media, did ABC, NBC, CBS do it? Rupert, and I know he really wanted to.
No one's arguing that startups aren't innovative. Of course
All I'm
they're
saying,
innovative.
startups are the only thing that's innovative, right? So media happened, YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, not ABC, NBC. Rocket ships, it wasn't. Boeing and Lockheed are largely unimportant in space launches, right? When all of the institutional world would give them all the ability to affect change. Tesla, only thing that's important compared to GM, which started on electric cars well before Tesla, spent a lot more money. They had way too much expertise around how to build a car to innovate, right?
You've been skeptical of electric cars in the past. Are you?
I've
you
never
still?
been skeptical of electric cars. You know, one of the things that you have to realize is, so, you know, we've been working on batteries for 7 years, 8 years, right? Look at when we made our battery investments because they're key to innovation in cars. And we have a couple of companies, couple that have been sold actually quite profitably, and others we're working on that are fundamental, and they're hard problems. So I'm hard-pressed to see where big companies have innovated.
Yeah.
And people say Valley is innovative, but change will happen because of large companies. You know, Volkswagen's not going to reinvent transportation. Uber can get lots of flack, but it's for a set of things that are good things to give it flack about, but the fundamental innovation they've caused, where I personally believe what Uber started, what Tesla started, what Google started with Waymo and driverless cars, will completely replace all public transportation, period, with what is a new style of public transportation. What will be interesting and completely unpredictable, whether cities will run it like they do public transportation, or whether they'll contract it out to a Waymo or a Google or a Tesla or somebody else.
You're very interested in clean tech. Your first startup was a soy milk startup when you were 20. But we can't...
Actually 16 then, but who's counting?
We can't talk about clean tech and innovation without talking about the fact that right now we have a president who is questioning the science behind climate change and is pushing for coal. How is that impacting Silicon Valley clean tech?
Look, climate change is a long-term issue. No one president can set it back. A little bit, yes, but not permanently.
But a lot of clean tech startups have worked really closely with the government in order to get started.
Look, let me tell you the good and the bad. Whether this administration likes coal or not, and they do, is not going to get a single person to make a 40-year investment in a new coal plant. Because everybody knows President Trump is not going to be president in 10 years, right? And nobody is going to risk a large capital asset on something that may go away because the next president happens to be more like President Obama than like President Trump on his view towards coal. So coal's done. We might get temporary leases and lights. That's not what's important. What's important is long-term we are marching towards a future which I'm actually convinced is very, very important. By the way, animal husbandry probably causes more carbon emissions than most of the things we talk about, right?
Is
And
he, in the short term, is President Trump a problem for your work in investing in clean tech?
So let me get to the bad part. The bad part doesn't have to do with President Trump. Clean tech, there was too much hype, and then it sort of reset, scared off all investors. The problem I see today, and I want to talk to you.
Oh, yeah.
The problem with clean tech is if 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, I went to MIT or Stanford and gave a talk on clean tech, I could fill a hall of 600 people like that. If I go to MIT or Caltech or Stanford or Berkeley, you're not going to fill that hall. The best minds getting PhDs are not going into clean tech. That's the fundamental problem. And because people know it's hard to get funding, we're not seeing as many startups as I'd like to see. You're still seeing some, but not as many. And that's a real problem. And if we see one, and we ask the question, is this capital intensive? And if the answer is yes, it's harder for us to fund because I know subsequent investors will not be there. That's why we started the Breakthrough Energy Ventures with Bill Gates and others to have a long-term view and a larger amount of funding so we can fund these efforts instead of trying to do it in the wrong institutional framework. But the fundamental problem, I think, is the best minds are no longer going into clean tech at our universities. And that's disappointing to me, worries me a lot.
Yeah. The other thing you've been writing about a lot is AI right now, and sort of what the future with AI looks like, and that we're going to see massive job loss. Do you think that the job loss and the effects of AI that we're already seeing are part of the kind of economic anger that we're seeing in the country right now?
Well,
or has it not hit?
I think there's multiple things going on. First, AI really hasn't had an impact yet.
When do you think it will? When is like the rubber going to meet the road?
So the thing that's hard, and that's why I never say I predict anything, even though writers quote me as predicting this or that all the time. I find English majors are not precise enough in their thinking. I'll get flack for that too.
I was a psychology major, to be clear.
I like to put you in the hot seat
I
too,
do,
a little bit.
You know, one thing I want to ask, you were very supportive of Peter Thiel going after Gawker and shutting Gawker down, funding it to be shut down. Do you still support that?
Absolutely, because I think reporters have to be accountable.
You said at the time that you think reporters need to be taught a lesson. Do you think that they still need to be taught lessons?
I think they need to be held accountable and need to be held to the fact that if they misabuse the power of the pen, which they do have, that they will be held accountable. This is not a one-way street.
What does that mean? What does held accountable mean?
Well, it should bear consequences for misreporting. We were just backstage talking about the fact it is unethical in news media to not have a reporter who's writing a story write the headline for that story. No major publication allows that. Nellie can write a story, but she has no control over the headline. It's geared for one purpose only. The headline writers want clicks. That, to me, is unethical. They've never talked to the people who are in the story. They've never been part of the research, but they come up with a catchy headline, all clickbait. I have a real problem with clickbait stories. I think the New York Times should ask the question, is it unethical to not have reporters write their own headlines? I believe it is unethical. I don't want to go too far into the press, but
Do you see yourself funding lawsuits against the press, like
I've
Peter?
never funded a lawsuit, but if I was really upset, I would absolutely fund a lawsuit.
Noted.
Noted. So, I look, the press isn't why we are here to talk, but I can talk about the press separately if somebody from the Commonwealth Club wants to do a session just on that. I have strong views on the media. Generally, they do a very good job, and they serve a very, very useful purpose, especially right now. And we talked about that too. But there's lots of problems with the press too, and clickbait in the institutions. So I fundamentally believe that institutions like the Gawker or whatever they're called, have had the New York Times lower its standards to try and chase clicks because they were so click-oriented. And I think every major media organization has lowered its standards chasing what these guys do. And that bothers me. Because I think the level of vetting at the New York Times was much higher 10 years ago than it is. Why? Because stories didn't need to be published till tomorrow. And now, if you aren't in the first half hour, which you can't possibly fully verify a story, time to market matters in minutes. And so the amount of diligence or verification or validation you can do is much lower. And so we are seeing, like the CNN events and other stories get out before they get validated. And I think, I don't blame the New York Times. I blame the people who made it where they get all the clicks, and so New York Times doesn't get revenue, so then they sort of loosen the reins a little bit on their level of due diligence on stories. But let's talk about something else.
You're starting to sound like President Trump.
I'm not sounding like, there's one thing Trump does, which is he speaks what he's feeling. I think that generally is a really good thing. Being honest about your feelings and not trying to be politically correct. I actually think Hillary Clinton lost partially because she was so well engineered to be politically correct that all the essence, the true gist of a person got lost.
Just before we move on, which we should do, but are there news organizations right now that you would want to see shut down?
I haven't thought about it, no.
Just wanted to check, just to make sure. So, let's get back to AI and robotics.
Yes, let's
How
go
about
to
it?
fun topics like AI. Here's the thing about AI.
Wait,
Sorry,
let me ask
go
one
ahead.
question. Before I get into more of the sort of dark stuff, just one kind of fun question on AI. What would you like to see replaced by robots? Like what? Because a lot of jobs are going to be replaced by robots. We all know this. Like other than obviously now robot reporters, but what else would you like to see? What are you excited about?
About half the stories you actually read in the press are written by something like Narrative Science or one of these companies. They're entirely robotic in this interest of getting to market quickly. But look, the exhaustive version of my view, I actually wrote in Forbes, a long 5,000-word blog called
but we're here right now. Just give it
on AI, and the basic thesis was the vast majority of jobs, definitely north of 50% of jobs that exist today, will not exist at some point in the future because they'll be replaced by AI.
Which one are you most excited about? Which one's most interesting? And you've talked about healthcare, you've talked about this, and what's going to happen? Where would you like put your money?
So there was a silly headline recently, say, Vinod predicts oncologists will be replaced. First, the world doesn't have enough oncologists. The CTO of the White House told me that less than 50% of cancer patients in this country get the level of treatment that a new med school student would know to provide a cancer patient.
Yeah.
Okay? There's a problem there because their knowledge is old, and you go to India, it's worse. You go to Papua New Guinea, it's really bad. We need to scale knowledge everywhere. So healthcare is one of my favorite areas, but it won't happen. And if any reporters are listening, timing matters. You know, when I say something will happen, it doesn't mean it'll happen today or tomorrow or in 5 years or 10 years.
But you've predicted that 80% of what doctors do will be replaced by robots eventually.
At some point, yes.
Yeah.
And I still believe that. And I didn't say, and this gets misreported a lot, 80% of doctors will be replaced. I said 80% of what doctors do will be replaced.
That's what I just said, yeah.
Yeah. And it gets misreported. Humans should do what humans are good at, which is the human element of care. In fact, about 3 or 4 years ago, I was talking to the dean of the medical school at Harvard, and I said, you ought to change your admissions criteria. Don't select for IQ. It's so hard to get into Harvard Med School or Stanford Med School. You're selecting for IQ. What you need to select for is EQ. I literally said, you really should look at the admissions criteria for USC Film School and use that. Those are the guys that have, gals that have mirror neurons, who are empathetic. That's what you want in a human doctor.
And that's the one skill we have the robots don't.
Well,
Maybe?
it's really the knowledge that they should have, the knowledge the oncologist hasn't kept up with, the 5,000 articles on your particular prostate cancer that they haven't read up on recently, that a system should provide.
And
With instant and better recall than any human could conceivably be expected to remember.
And then in lieu of all these jobs, or when these jobs disappear, then you're a supporter of the idea of universal basic income,
Yeah.
which is a super interesting concept.
So
and
2014, what I said, the headline, I wrote my own blog so I could write the headline and not have it be distorted. Sorry, I gotta keep taking digs at reporters.
Vinod, if you keep going at this reporter thing, I'm gonna have to ask about the beach.
I'm happy to talk about it. If you really want to take that on, let's divert to the beach. New York Times writes a headline.
No.
Khosla imposes,
Guys, I'm so
Khosla
sorry.
erects an imposing gate. First, the gate isn't imposing. Two, it was erected in the 1950s before I was born. Right? This is the problem with the New York Times reporting on this kind of an issue.
Vinod,
They imagine an emotional
beach-
angle instead of saying it's a matter of principle.
the beach was accessible to surfers for generations, and then
No,
you
it was
closed
not. You have your facts wrong. And if you did the due diligence,
Okay.
anyway, look, let's go back to AI. What I said was we will have GDP growth. This was the title I wrote. We'll have great GDP growth, great productivity growth, great everything, and increasing income disparity. So great abundance, great GDP growth, great productivity growth. Economists will be really, really happy, and they'll be really screwed because we'll have increasing income disparity.
So we redistribute with universal basic income for everyone.
Yeah, so-
my question for you, what do people do with all their free time? What's your vision? Because everyone has a separate idea.
Sure.
So if you get your monthly check, what do you do all day?
the optimistic view, and go back to everything I say is speculation, not prediction. For people who are precise, there's a big difference between those two. And I like to be very precise in my choice of words. It would be awesome to free human beings to not need to work. People who want to work should work and work on the things they want to work on.
But what are like some example
So the
activities for people
utopian
who
view,
don't work?
If I work because I like to work, not because I need to work. It was 30 years ago I stopped needing to work. And I work 80 hours a week because I enjoy every minute of it. And I'm 62, and I expect I'll be, health permitting, I'll be working 80 hours a week 20 years from now. Right? I have no doubt in my mind this is so much fun, and helping entrepreneurs, having breakthrough technologies, causing impact and change, those are all fun things to do. I'd rather do that than watch the Kardashians.
But
I have no love for the Kardashians, though I've never met them or seen their show.
Well, my question is super like practical. I'm just genuinely curious. In this
So, look,
future vision,
look,
no, literally, like you wake up in the morning, what are you doing?
Let me try and answer. If you're an assembly line worker, you don't have a job you really want. You need it to make a living. If there's income, if there's enough gross domestic product in the country, then you should be able to afford a minimum income for everybody. The problem with technology-driven growth is it's not inclusive naturally. And we have to do something about it. That's why I wrote about it in 2014, before the term universal basic income was important. But separate that out, and I'll come back to it. The question of if we can eliminate the need for work for jobs that nobody wants to do. You know, you sit in a mind-numbing job assembling stuff in China on an assembly line, it's not fun.
Yeah. I still don't
Right?
have a...
And so there's a lot of things we need to eliminate because we need to do them because only humans can do them, and so we hire people to do them. That's why garbage workers get paid the most, because we need them to do things. So what happens when, let's say this utopian world happens, and I think it's a long ways away, it's decades away, it's not 20 years away, it's 40 years away or 50 years away, and it's impossible to speculate how far away. A taxi driver doesn't love his job, he does it because he needs an income. If there's basic universal income, we won't need to do things because we need to have an income. Now, I do believe that we need to have incentives stay in society, so if everybody is paid, there's no incentive, and there's a problem if you don't have incentives. So that's the Republican in me. I'm a registered independent. When I was very young, I was very Republican because economic efficiency mattered. Since the climate issue, I became much more independent and mostly voted Democratic because of my focus on the large problem we are creating in climate change. Yeah. And recently in inclusiveness and income equality.
One thing, just sort of building on this idea of inclusiveness and income inclusiveness.
Can we come back to it? Can I finish your previous question?
More...
Look, an important question, if nobody had to work, is how people find self-worth.
Exactly.
Right? And I hint at this in this article in 2014 because I worry about it. Now, America's Got Talent is sort of like an example of a job that didn't exist. And maybe everybody will be competing there. But
you mean like the contestants, like the plate spinning and things?
Yeah, or X Games. X Games wasn't a profession, it's now a profession. And those people do it because they love it, okay? Now, maybe it'll be perfectly okay to not be a starving artist, just be actually a decent, well-off artist.
So like
Because you
massive
perceive your-
government-organized America's Got Talent things to occupy.
No, look, some
I've heard
things
of
are
worse, there are
impossible.
worse visions for the future than that.
Some things are impossible to predict, but a basic level of healthcare, a basic level of food and caring and transportation and housing is all a good thing for society. We'll have a political technology, will create this multiplication of resources. If I can, there's probably 1 million doctors in the United States, rough, give or take. If I can create 10 million doctors worth of expertise in AI systems and use the doctors only for what they love to do, which is most doctors I know, before they got jaded with the system, the healthcare system, love talking to patients.
Yeah.
Right? If they can only do that, they'd be happier. Not filing claims forms and taking 4 minutes per patient visit, not having any history. That's the reality of medicine today.
Yeah. Because we're running short on time and got a little...
Sorry,
No,
I
it's
talked too
okay.
much.
I just realized we've got this huge stack of questions, and I want to get to a few more before we go to audience questions. But we talked about inclusiveness. We can't talk about Silicon Valley right now without talking about diversity. So you grew up in India. You fund a lot of immigrant founders. How is President Trump's rhetoric around immigration, around the H-1B programs, around entrepreneurs, how is that already having an impact on Silicon Valley right now?
Well, I think other places are getting talent from overseas faster than we are. We're still getting some talent, but I completely disagree with the administration on immigration. I think talent is what made this country great. It's a little bit unfair. When I was graduating from IIT, I was classified as one of the brain drain from the country. That was the term that was the most common term in India because the best engineering students went to the most interesting jobs, which happened to be in Silicon Valley. It's been true for a long time. That was India's loss, our gain as in Silicon Valley and the US. Now, to be fair, much of that talent is also had benefits for India, and it has a vibrant technology business because of those immigrants, and that's why these things are unpredictable. They're good for both countries, really. But we should attract the talent. There's other kinds of diversity which are issues in Silicon Valley, and some are real and some are not.
What do you mean?
My general view is Silicon Valley is much more diverse than any other business. Take financial services, take Hollywood, take any other place. Take the auto industry, take the Midwest, and
This actually leads me, oh my God, we have so many audience questions. This actually leads me into a question I got on Twitter right before coming in here, which was to ask you, what is your plan to help root out sexual harassment and some of the issues around women in the venture capital industry?
well, so look, I've been a little surprised. I did not know that there was any discrimination. Now, whether it's real or not,
Any?
yeah, I'm honest. I've gone to the habit of asking women specifically that question when you present, especially women entrepreneurs, how do you feel? And I've been surprised at the answers. What I would say is
Wait, what
the
do you mean?
examples you saw recently with what was the venture firm called? I forget their name. Somebody here knows. This Caldwell guy who I don't know. That exists in every industry. I think in venture capital, it's rarer than in most other businesses.
You think Silicon
Where
Valley has
there-
less of an issue than
Huh?
most other, you think Silicon Valley has less of an issue than most other industries?
I think so. We probably don't have enough time to go into it, but there is heightened sensitivity to the issue, and that's a good thing. Whether it was this particular firm, somebody remember the name? Binary Capital, yes. It's great to have increased sensitivity. The more something's talked about, more it's front of mind, the less it's excused, and that's a good thing. I'm much more sensitive now when women entrepreneurs present to actually ask them this question.
Wait, what is the question you ask?
Like, do you feel like there's discrimination? Any woman entrepreneur I ask that question. Not in the venture capital context, I'm talking about in general. And by and large, because I've been asking this question, I think it's a reality because it's perceived as a reality, and perception's more important than reality. If women feel a certain way, then it affects their behavior and the behavior of others, and so we have to do something about it. We do have to fix this problem. I have 3 daughters, so I'm particularly sensitive to this issue.
Yeah.
Right?
But that women are being hypersensitive in Silicon Valley about this issue?
Well, I don't think women are being hypersensitive. I think the issue is if it's perceived this way. So I'll give you an example that surprised me. I was talking to a woman entrepreneur, and she said when she was pitching, she got asked when she's going to have children. I think that's a completely inappropriate question and shouldn't have been asked. Right? I won't sort of mention who asked, which venture firm asked that question.
Oh, please do.
But look, there's every kind of person in every business. The question is, what's the percentage of people who proactively discriminate versus proactively are affirmative in their actions? I actually personally find that if women are part of an entrepreneurial team or a senior management team, the company tends to do better because they bring a dimension to the discussions, the everyday discussions. So it's good to have diversity. It's good,
Yeah.
there's this accusation.
Just to sum it up, so just to sum it up, you think that Silicon Valley, that other industries have a worse problem in Silicon Valley, it's just that people here are being more vocal about it?
Look,
or it's being sort of...
No, here's what I'm saying very precisely. I'm telling you that's my impression. I've never done a statistical survey to authoritatively tell you what's true. I'd love to see actually real data on percentage of women in this business versus percentage of women in finance versus percentage of women in the auto industry. I don't know the answer. I don't spend my time there. Frankly, I don't meet a lot of venture capitalists. I spend all my time with entrepreneurs. So I don't know the definitive answer. I'm telling you that was my impression. I'm heightened, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And I am much more proactive about asking the question and making sure it doesn't happen. It definitely doesn't happen, I don't believe, in our firm. But I could be mistaken. We have a lot of women CEOs in our portfolio. I think there's a fundamental...
You and I will just... I think that there's a problem in Silicon Valley around gender and diversity in general, but you and I will disagree on that.
No, I'm not saying... So let me be precise. I'm not saying there's not a problem with gender diversity. Whether there's discrimination or not is a different question of whether there's gender diversity.
Yeah.
Right? And I do believe gender diversity and every other kind of diversity, age diversity, nationality diversity, will improve a company because it adds dimensions to the discussions that go on every day in a company. And I'm huge on the real benefits of diversity in making a company more successful because more ideas get brought to the table from more points of view. Now, gender diversity is a problem because far fewer people go into engineering and technology, and
Of course, we need more engineers. I want to get to
and so
audience questions
we need
before
to
we get
solve
too...
that problem, and 10 years later, we'll have a shot at equalizing gender diversity, for example. Now, so if women went into the kinds of fields that lead to entrepreneurship of the Silicon Valley style, and there's many other types of entrepreneurship, then you'll see gender diversity increase in Silicon Valley, but I think we should be proactive about it. So I don't think I'm agreeing, I'm just being very precise in the way I'm answering your question.
No, I see.
Hopefully like a good engineer.
Yeah, my own, we don't need to get into it.
Okay, let's go to...
Okay, so audience questions. There are a lot of them. You guys have a lot of questions. People are raising their hands. Okay, the first one I want to do, in typical reporter fashion, which one of your predictions was terribly wrong, and what did you learn from that mistake?
Well, one, I don't make predictions, I speculate. Look, my biggest strength is I've screwed up in more ways than most people in this room, mostly because I've tried more things.
Give an example. Everyone likes to hear about a time when you, what was a bet you, I mean,
There's
Hampton
so many.
Creek.
I was knocking Cisco earlier. Cisco was an application running on Sun motherboards. Sun should have realized that networking was much bigger than computing, or could be, or was at least as big. Right? It was plain dumb of me to not realize that in the 80s. That somebody took an application built on a Sun motherboard, made it a router, and Cisco was born. That's just one. Take pen computing. We did that a long, long time ago. And the slogan was, the pen's the point. It wasn't the point. It was stupid to think the pen's the point. In fact, mobility was the point. And we got this very expensive lesson. That's why I say, one of the things I know is I'm going to keep making mistakes because I'm speculating on a lot of things and then backing them.
What is it that, there's a lot of research on resiliency. What is it that allows you to bounce back? What do you...
Look, I always say my willingness to fail allows me to succeed. And if I was too afraid to fail, I wouldn't try the things, and I would fail to try instead of trying and failing. Right? There's a very big difference between those two. I think most people fail to try, and so they never fail. But in my view, they always fail because they fail to even attempt something. It's a really important cultural difference. It's one of the reasons I think big companies don't innovate, because large radical risks they don't take. Incremental risks they take all the time. Radical risks are very rare in large organizations, because frankly, if a Silicon Valley entrepreneur attempts something bold and fails, they get funded again. In a big company, you fail at a large, bold attempt, you get relegated to never getting promoted.
Yeah.
Right? So culture matters.
I want to hop to our next one. What do you look for in founders, and what do you... Basically, what do you look for in your ideal young founder, or your ideal founder?
Look,
I have to change that a little.
There is no one definition of founder. Any example you give me of a successful founder I create, I'll give you a counter example of somebody who didn't. So one thing you learn in our business is humility. How often you're wrong.
But what's like a test? I mean, do you have any way of ascertaining someone's entrepreneurial spirit? Like, do you take them out to lunch and see if they like know how to do, you know?
if you don't
I don't
have
know.
strong religious beliefs about what you're trying to do, you'll tend to not succeed. So you have to be totally obstinate about your vision. At the same time, most founders don't get to their vision in a straight line. It's zigzag, go left, go right, find your way, survive long enough, get lucky, all those things. Luck's a huge part of success. It's just good founders give themselves multiple shots to get lucky. So you want founders to think flexibly, but not be agreeable with everybody who gives them advice.
How can you quickly tell if someone thinks flexibly? You're making a lot of snap decisions. You guys are investing in tons of...
So I was talking to a founder yesterday, evaluating a new company. And on purpose, I challenged 2 of his key hires. And I wanted to see how he reacted to me saying, hey, those guys are the wrong guys for this position. It lets me tell how flexible he'd be. He engaged in a dialogue, not, you're a jerk. I was sort of being a little bit of a jerk, challenging him. Me? I'm never a jerk. Unless you think being honest is a jerk, or having principles is a jerk. But there's ways to test founders. I always do.
That sounds like a pretty interesting, that's a good example test. Okay, another one. If you were, and just a quick one, if you were starting your first business today, what would it be?
So I answered this question on Quora, on a Ask Me Anything on Quora about a year ago. I think nothing about medicine needs to stay the same, right? We have to get away from the idea that you use symptoms to diagnose disease. Data science should diagnose disease. So the startup I would do, I take 1 million people, measure hundreds, if not thousands of variables in their blood, in their microbiome, in their physiology, every week for a year. I'd have 50 million data points, each data point being thousands of data points in itself. That's the data set. I could predict most disease, diagnose most disease. That's the startup I would do and get excited about doing. That was the same answer I gave a year and a half ago or so on Quora, the same answer I'd give today. And I'm working on bits and pieces of it for lots of reasons. It's very complex and can't be done. But we will get there. Almost certainly, everything you learn in medicine, I jokingly told a Stanford Medical School audience about 3 years ago, if I wanted to be a really good doctor in 15 years, I would not go to the med school, I'd go to the math department. I truly, fully believe, whether it's in 15 years or 30 years, I don't know the answer, and it's all speculation, and timing is near impossible to predict, and it's not near term. But almost certainly, data science and AI will do much better diagnosis than any human can. It'll do much better prescription, whether it's prescribing a drug or prescribing a procedure. Should you have bypass surgery or a stent, or most of that medicine is pretty crappy evidence. And it's very, very biased evidence. We should have real science behind medicine. Medicine's much better than it has ever been. So we have to acknowledge every aspect of medicine has improved over the last 10 years, 30 years, 100 years. But that doesn't mean it's as good as it can be. It's being practiced, an iteration of practice to improve medicine. And it's done a pretty damn good job. But when AI does medicine, it'll be so much more better.
Your next company would be how to live forever.
Well, I don't, for society, rejuvenating society is important, and the cycle of life and death is actually good. I'd like to live longer, but think society benefits from the way organisms have lifespans. Long topic, we won't get into that.
I don't even want to ask if you're doing the teenage blood transfusions. I'm too nervous. I don't want to get into that one.
I haven't tried it.
But it's been offered?
No, it hasn't been offered to me, but I know plenty of people who think about it. Look, here's the facts. If you give a doctor 5,000 data points, they wouldn't know how to diagnose you. If you give a system 5,000 data points, say, hey, I can do really good diagnosis, and if you had 50,000 more, it'd be better. And take a simple example, the small company that we had a tiny investment in called Applied Proteomics. They take every blood sample and fractionate it into 300,000 data points of biomarkers. That should, in general, be done for every disease. They've turned this data science project into one to say, most people who need colonoscopy don't get it because it's so difficult and unpleasant. And can we get enough information to recommend whether you really, really are at high risk and should get a colonoscopy? And it'll get better and eventually replace colonoscopy. That's just the beginning of this path to a 40, 50-year vision.
Yeah.
And I think we should all be excited about it. You know, the people who object to this don't realize that at least 3 billion of the 7 billion people on this planet have never seen a doctor, have no access to one, couldn't afford one, definitely couldn't afford the drugs that Merck and Pfizer and others put out. And it's criminal that they can't, especially when it's possible to do, and I hope the best of you work on these kinds of problems. That's what's so exciting. That's why I'll be working 80 hours a week 20 years from now, health permitting.
What is something that you believe that nobody else agrees with? Is genuinely.
I just said this. Like, I get so much flack for believing machines and systems can do medicine better than humans. That's just one of many. Or that most jobs will be replaced. People forget.
Oh, that's a good one.
The vast majority of jobs in the year 1900 in the US were in agriculture. By the year 2000, it was something like 2% of all jobs. So most jobs got displaced. Now, it can happen again. I recently, for example, I took the top 20 job categories in the United States, and I sent you this deck I just done for a different organization. And I'm giving a talk next month in September on the economic implications of AI, and I was starting to put sort of things together. I looked at the top 20 job categories in the United States. It was very clear that at least 15 of them will have more than 50% of the jobs replaceable, whether it's in 25 years or 50 years, I don't know. And it depends on which entrepreneur takes it on themselves to go innovate that job category.
If you were
That's
high
dramatic.
School, yeah.
That's dramatic social change, and make all the economic metrics that everybody in Washington pays attention to that are mostly meaningless look great, and it'll feel very painful to the people who are affected. That's the inclusiveness part. This is where I worry about technology. I'm a technology optimist, but there are consequences and side effects that aren't great, that we should all worry about. We will have the resources to address them adequately.
Do you think our society will be organized enough to distribute those resources?
Well, there's one piece
Like if
of...
San Francisco's any example, San Francisco's had the greatest inequality, the greatest wealth creation machine and more inequality than almost
Let me
anywhere
give
in
you
the
the
world.
optimistic view. Look, if the Tea Party doesn't like the world today, they will hate the world 30 years from now.
That's optimistic? But
the optimistic piece is the following. Capitalism was a great system when economic production efficiency was the main goal. We've gotten very, very good at economic efficiency in production. We're now in this phase where capitalism is creating demand by convincing you want to carry the same handbag that Kim Kardashian does. Right? It's demand creation. Okay, sorry. Some people want.
I
So
carry an
demand
old backpack,
creation,
but
I don't think is value added to society. When you want to convince me to buy $400 jeans instead of $50 jeans, to me that's false creation of demand. And there's capitalism does not serve a great purpose. The original reason capitalism made sense. The optimistic piece is capitalism is by permission of democracy, and nobody should forget that. And if capitalism doesn't serve the majority of the people, permission for capitalism will be revoked, and that may be a good thing. I'm a total capitalist, so don't get me wrong.
You've benefited from
but
capitalism
either
enormously.
capitalists will automatically adjust to be more inclusive, or the permission for capitalism will be revoked by democracy. That's a great thing about democracy. It has to benefit most of the people.
I would be skeptical that it would be such a civilized revoking capitalism. That transition, I just feel would be
what do you think
a little more
the Trump
tense.
election was about? A constituency that felt left out was voting not to be politically correct, not to say you can't say, hey, I won't even go into examples. There's plenty of Trump examples.
Some politically incorrect, no, yeah.
Well, no, I'm not, I don't worry about politically correctness. But the fact is, there's a bunch of people. More people voted for Trump than for Hillary, and they were angry about something.
Well, technically not more,
And that's...
But with the electoral college system, yes, he won.
Yeah, okay. Yes, technically correct. But the fact is, even if it was close, there was a message in there that some things need to be fixed, that some people are really angry. And we should take that message and address it. And that's where democracy can revoke permission for capitalism. There are countries in Europe where that is very much true, that are much more socialist. I'd hate to see us go there, but the issues they're concerned about, we need to address.
We have time for one last thing. There are a lot of questions about universal basic income, but I think we've really covered it. I really like the question that's used in Forum in San Francisco also, which is, what is your 60-second? We've talked a lot about the negatives. We've obviously gotten into some debates. I still think you're not going to come out on the right side on Martin's Beach, but kind of looking
I'm not
forward.
saying I will. I'm just saying it's a legal question that the courts need to decide. And principles matter, not misinformed press that doesn't even know the facts.
You're just not going to win that one.
Principles are important whether I win or lose.
You're not.
And I know it makes great headlines, so sells more advertising for you guys. But go to your question.
You're not going to win that one, and that is a story that I'm working on for later. So, but the I want to end on a upbeat note and something for people to take home, which is, give me your 60-second idea to change the world. Give me your 60-second. I know we've talked a lot about it, but if you had to say the one thing for people to sort of internalize 60 seconds to make the world better right now.
Well, there's no one idea. There's 100 ideas. The way to look at the world is 700 million people or so on the planet have a rich lifestyle. It's energy rich, it's resource rich, it's healthcare services rich, it's transportation rich, it's a rich lifestyle. 7 billion people want it. Can we do 10 times as much of everything the same way? The answer is no. Technology is the necessary, though not sufficient, resource multiplier. It's the only thing that can multiply resources. That's the opportunity for this audience. I think that's where technology can solve the world's problems. Now, politics can still screw that up. So that's why I say technology is necessary and the only thing that can multiply resources, but it's not sufficient. But that's the opportunity. This is why I'm so bullish about the role Silicon Valley can play in meeting social needs. And it's fun to do. And do it in a non-institutional way. By non-institutional way, I mean Citibank won't solve financial inclusion, Square will, if anybody does it.
So quit your jobs.
Volkswagen and GM won't solve transportation. Whether it's Waymo or somebody else does it, it'll be technology-driven, non-institutional, let's break the rules, radical kind of approach. And this non-institutional way of doing things, though less predictable, is much more fun and exciting. And probably the main way we will get to getting 7 billion people the kind of lifestyle they'd all want.
Well, Vinod Khosla, thank you so much for coming and sitting down.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
I hope you all enjoyed this evening's program brought to you by Idea to IPO, Commonwealth Club Silicon Valley. Again, we'd like to thank Vinod Khosla, founder of Khosla Ventures, Nellie Bowles, reporter for the New York Times, our audience here in Palo Alto, and those of you joining us on the radio. And now this meeting is adjourned.